How's everybody doing? My name is Anthony Brian Logan, and today we got to talk about this op-ed from the New York Times that was written by a anonymous senior administration official that is within Trump's White House, allegedly. You know, the New York Times says, we know who the person is, but we can't tell you, and this, that, and the third. It could be somebody that works at the New York Times, some random person trolling them, who knows? But the person claims to be inside the White House working for Trump, but also working against Trump. Now, before we get into what that op-ed says, I did read it, and I'll place it in the box if you want to read it for yourself. Before we get into it, let's watch a video of Trump reacting to it. Now, I'm not quite sure what the situation was here. I suppose there was some kind of meeting with sheriffs from all over the nation, but you'll see him talk about this particular op-ed. After we get done with that, I'll talk about what Trump said, and then I'll talk about the op-ed in a little bit more detail. So without further ado, let's go ahead and roll it.
I am part of the resistance inside the Trump administration.
Hey, I asked the sheriffs, can you imagine this? We have somebody in what I call the failing New York Times that's talking about he's part of the resistance within the Trump administration. This is what we have to deal with. And, you know, the dishonest media, because you people deal with it as well as I do, but it's really a disgrace. I will say this. Nobody has done what this administration's done in terms of getting things passed and getting things through. An article was just printed, just came out a few minutes ago. Trump breaks the record for budget gridlock wins, scores big win. So for 20 years, it's a 20-year record. For 20-year record, they call it the fouled up budget gridlock, and scores big win. Here's your thing. So this just came out. So in 20 years, it hasn't been like it is now. We broke it. That's just really positive stuff. And then in addition to that, point after point after point, if you look, almost 4 million jobs created since the election, of which many are young. More Americans now employed than ever recorded in our history. So we have more people working today than at any point ever in our history. We've created 400,000 manufacturing jobs. Manufacturing jobs are growing at the fastest pace in more than 30 years. Economic growth last quarter was 4.2%. And as you people know, it was headed down big. And it was a low number, very low number. It would have been, in my opinion, it would have been less than zero. It was heading to negative numbers. New employment claims recently hit think of that. The unemployment picture in the country is the best it's been in 49 years. African American unemployment lowest in the history of our country. Asian American unemployment lowest in the history of our country. Hispanic American unemployment lowest in the history of our country. I mean, I'm just looking at these, just point after point. Under my administration, veterans' unemployment reached its lowest in many, many years. Let's see, almost 3.9 million Americans have been lifted off food stamps just since my election. Then you go into all of the benefits that we got from the tax cuts. All of you people benefited tremendously from the tax cuts. Thank you, sir. You go into regulation cuts. You go into right to try. Right to try is where you have the right, if a person's terminally ill, you have a right to go and try and see whether or not a drug that's not approved yet can be used and utilized. They didn't allow that. Point after point, getting rid of the individual mandate, the most unpopular thing there is in Obamacare, coming up with new health care plans. We've never had a period, even if you look at the Olympics, the World Cup, you just saw them. They were in my office, got the World Cup. Nobody has, and we have started the wall. Nobody has ever done in less than a 2-year period what we've done. So when you tell me about some anonymous source within the administration, probably who's failing and probably here for all the wrong reasons. No. And the New York Times is failing. If I weren't here, I believe the New York Times probably wouldn't even exist. And someday, let me just tell you, and someday when I'm not president, which hopefully will be in about 6.5 years from now, the New York Times and CNN and all of these phony media outlets will be out of business, folks. They'll be out of business because there'll be nothing to write and there'll be nothing of interest. So nobody has done what this administration has done. And I agree, it's different from an agenda, which is much different than ours, and it's certainly not your agenda, that I can tell you.
Thank you.
It's about open borders. It's about letting people flee into our country. It's about a disaster and crime for our country. So they don't like Donald Trump, and I don't like them because they're very dishonest people. Remember this also about the New York Times. When I won, they were forced to apologize to their subscribers. They wrote a letter of apology. It was the first time anybody's ever done it because they covered the election incorrectly. So if the failing New York Times has an anonymous editorial, can you believe it? Anonymous, meaning gutless, a gutless editorial. We're doing a great job. The poll numbers are through the roof. Our poll numbers are great. And guess what? Nobody is going to come close to beating me in 2020 because of what we've done. We've done more than anybody ever thought possible in, it's not even 2 years. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, so you saw that. You see what's happening there. Now, I like Trump and how he just pretty much attacks things head on, right? He doesn't really wait and come up with some kind of speech or prepared statement. Nah, I don't like what's going on here. I'm going to speak my mind. And I think that's part of the reason why this person wrote this article or this op-ed, and it's also why a lot of people don't like Trump. It's why you have so many never Trumpers on the left and the right, because they're not used to a thing like this. They're used to politicians coming out being really polished, really well-spoken, saying prepared things, being real careful. They're not used to a guy as like a bull in a china shop that just does pretty much whatever he wants to do. Within reason, of course. They're not used to that. They don't like that. It makes them feel uncomfortable. It makes them feel nervous. It makes them feel insecure. But me, I love it. That's part of the reason why I voted for the man to begin with, because I knew that he was going to do things differently than what had been done over the past few administrations. Okay. This is why I got like John McCain, who we'll talk about in a moment, invited Mike Pence, George Bush, Barack Obama. He sees them as being politicians, really seasoned, well-spoken, that would pretty much do what the deep state tells them to do. Now, speaking of Mike Pence, some people are saying that because of the use of the word lodestar in reference to John McCain, that it's Mike Pence who is an anonymous official in this particular op-ed. I doubt that to be true. I think that's reaching. It's because it was one word used that's not commonly used. That means it's, and then why would he do that intentionally to, reveal himself? I don't know. I think that there will be a little bit more thought process behind it. I believe it's not anybody in the White House, to be perfectly honest with you. I think it's somebody that is a random person trolling, working for the New York Times or whatever. Now, New York Times said that they do know who it is and they vetted them. And if you want the whole process, you can contact them to see what the process is. But they could tell you anything. When you have an anonymous op-ed with no name on it, it's easy to just say whatever you want to say and never reveal who said it, right? They even said in the beginning of the op-ed that we normally don't do this, is that, and the third. But I digress. To get into what the op-ed says, they're basically saying there's a group of us, so it's not just one person, a group of us that are in the White House who are basically controlling Trump to a certain extent. They say they like a lot of what he talks about, the jobs and things like that. They understand what he's trying to do, but they say that he goes too far off the rails and they are there to reel him in and to prevent him from acting out in a way that's going to be detrimental to the country. All right. So they're basically saying there's adults in the room. Never you worry. We're going to be here to save the day. And we're going to do this until Trump leaves office. So I guess they count on him not being there very long. This is his first term in the USA as a president. You're allowed 2 terms of 4 years each. So they're probably banking on him not being there in 2020. Now, New York Times said that they were not revealing his identity because his job may be in jeopardy. His or her, whatever. I'm not really sure what pronoun they use. But here's my thing. If you're waiting for the guy to be out of office in 2020, if you're out here basically snitching on the man, because let's be clear, no president that I've ever seen had no advisors. There's a thing called advisors for a reason. You can't just be one person and lead by yourself, the entire nation, and really to a certain extent, the entire world. You got to have advisors. So you can say there's adults in the room and we keep them from going off the rails, and that's fine. But how is that any different than Barack Obama, George Bush, Bill Clinton? These people did not rule the country by themselves. They had advisors who they came to for information on how to do certain things. I think the difference here with Trump is that he does a lot of things on his own without relying upon the advisors. See, back in previous presidencies, the advisors would be like the shadow president, right? And the president would be like a puppet. He's just a figurehead of the operation that is not really controlled by him. But Trump is leading from the front. So anyone that leads from the front is going to be looked at in a negative way if they don't do what the establishment thinks that they should do, if they don't follow the establishment rules. Now, this person said they're not part of the deep state. They're part of the stable state. Deep state, stable state, whatever you want to call it, I can't tell the difference. All right. If you have a certain agenda and you're trying to control things, I'm not really sure what you call that. All right. Either you're an advisor and you're there to give practical and reasonable advice, or you're part of the deep state that's trying to control things from behind the scenes. Right. There was also a thing mentioned in here about Trump preferring dictators like Vladimir Putin and Kim Jong-un. Well, last I checked, Xi Jinping should fall into the same category. You know, he just recently removed his own term limits for president. He can be the president or leader, whatever it is, of China until he dies. But it's okay, I guess, because China is a big trade partner, or not really a trade partner, more like, it's really one-sided in their favor. But I digress. We don't want to mention China. We don't want to mention anywhere else in the world. We want to mention Russia and North Korea. This seems like a leftist journalist that wrote this. I'd love to be a fly on the wall and see how this whole thing came about, right? Because it doesn't seem like a conservative person that is writing this, or a White House anonymous senior official. It seems like a journalist wrote this trying to just get some attention to the New York Times. It was hilarious when Trump said the New York Times is failing. I think I did read somewhere that they're having some kind of issues. I know when I go on New York Times and I read articles, if I've read too much or if I've looked at too many, after a certain period of time, it'll say you got to subscribe. I'm not going to subscribe to you to read some of these articles. I can pretty much see anywhere something like this. That's exclusive content to New York Times, but most of what I read on there can be seen anywhere else, and it's pretty much the same information, just written slightly different because it comes from a different author. But if you're talking about a news event, it can't really be that much different unless you're editorializing, and I'm not really trying to see too much of that from the liberal, leftist, lamestream media a la New York Times. So that's pretty much all I got to say about it. At the end of the day, I think what Trump said was right. This person is gutless. If you want to say something about the president negative like that, just come out and say it. Don't be afraid. Just bounce. I'm sure you'll be able to get picked up elsewhere. You see what happened to James Comey, all these people. Who was that guy? Was it McCabe? One of these guys. Peter Strzok. Peter Strzok got fired from the FBI. They came out with a GoFundMe. They raised like $500,000 in just a few days. You'll be okay if you come out and just say what you want to say. But maybe, just being devil's advocate here, maybe he or she wants to be there just to make sure that things go right and that Trump's on the correct path. But if that's the case, then what was the point of making this op-ed public? Why would you do that? If you really want to help the nation, stay behind the scenes and don't say nothing, right? Keep your little constituency, this little group of people, keep that under wraps and just work behind the scenes to make America great again. So what do you think? Do you think the person who wrote this article is actually in the White House? Are they actually a senior administration official? Or do you believe there's some kind of journalist, some kind of random person? If they are in the White House, how do you feel about them writing this op-ed to the New York Times anonymously? Is it a coward's way out? Should they put their name on it and say, yes, this is how I feel? Should they just remain quiet, don't say nothing, and just work behind the scenes, work with Trump, be an advisor, be someone that's getting paid by the federal government to do a job? All right. Like I said, every president has advisors. They are there just to make sure that things go right. A president cannot lead by himself. You're talking about in the U.S. alone, you got about 325 million people. But the things that the U.S. implements can affect the entire world, 7 billion people. You can't have that much kind of you can't have that kind of reach, that kind of influence over people without having anybody that's going to assist you. But whatever your comments are, please let me know in the comments below. And that's all I got to say for this video. If you like what you heard, please comment, rate, share, and subscribe. Peace.